Hello, hi, and welcome to another episode of Wellness in the Workplace. My name is Mbali Mzinyane, and I am your host. Wellness in the Workplace is a podcast that aims to equip new and experienced professionals with the tools and insights to navigate challenging workplace dynamics. And in today's episode, I am bringing you the final installment of Wellness in the Workplace Season 1. And what is the final episode for 2022? It has been an insightful, informative and transformative season for me that has presented so many opportunities of learning, unlearning and reflection, and I can only hope that it has done the same for you. Very special thank you to our guests who have featured on the podcast over the last 15 episodes. I do not take for granted the privilege of your time, your expertise and your insight. Thank you so much for just the openness and the sharing that you brought to the podcast and just enriched the content on this platform. And most importantly, a big thank you to you, the listener, the viewer. Thank you so much for your continued support over the last season. This podcast certainly would not have grown without your continued support. So I see you and I truly appreciate you for seeing me. And on that note, I do want to end off this final season, or the final episode rather, of this season with a Q&A that I actually had on the Wellness in the Workplace Instagram page, where I asked followers and supporters of the page to submit a few questions regarding career, regarding the podcast, or anything really just related to the content that we've shared over the last season. And that's what I'll be doing for this episode. I'll be answering some questions from the audience, and I hope you stay tuned. So I'll be answering about 7 questions. I had to open up another round of questions because the first time around we didn't get as much of a great reception. So it'll be about 7 questions, and this is the first time that I'm actually answering these questions. And it's just based on, different aspects of either my career, of the podcast, or anything that is related to career development or professional development in different areas. So the first question here is, how intentional are you about managing your time between being a podcaster while also working? How do you strike the balance if it does exist? Okay, this is a very good question. So I don't necessarily believe in striking a balance. I think it's all about prioritization. I have said this a few times on a live that I was featured on Instagram a few weeks ago, saying that, there's a bit of a myth and a story that we've been sold around work-life balance. I think what it actually is prioritizing what you need at a certain point in time, given the season that you're in, and having to then schedule your time, having to schedule your availability, and having to schedule your commitment according to those priorities. So that's pretty much what I've had to do, knowing that at this stage my main priority is obviously my 9 to 5, because it does take up the bulk of my time. And then secondary to that, but not less important, is the podcast, and making sure that I do commit enough time to doing the relevant research, reaching out to potential guests, and also preparing to record beforehand, and that does take a certain number of time, or a certain amount of time rather, and a level of commitment and dedication. But because I know that it is an important priority to me, I am able to put in the right level of effort, the right level of commitment, and the right level of dedication, so that I make sure I deliver quality insights and quality content on the podcast while still maintaining a good record of work at my 9 to 5. So that's how I do it. So the second question is, hi Mbali, where can I reach out to get help on picking a career? So I'm not sure if this question is asked from the perspective of someone who is starting out at university and wants to know, what degree they should choose that would later inform their career path, or it could be someone already in a role in an organization and maybe is looking to pivot into a different career. But either way, I think the answer would be relevant to both instances. So I think the most important thing that goes into making a choice about your career has to be knowing what your strengths are. I'm a firm believer in playing to your strengths, and I'm a firm believer of knowing what it is that you're capable of so that you can leverage that in the work environment. I think playing to your strengths allows you to then, prosper a lot quicker and a lot better. And in so doing, it does attract a lot more, I guess, opportunities in the world of work, because what you will be doing is that you'll be playing to your natural abilities and not having to put as much effort and energy into exerting, focus in an area that you might not necessarily know. So if you try to do something that you are not necessarily strong in, or not necessarily don't have a natural inclination or aptitude for, it might make things a lot more difficult for you over and above the dynamics that you need to navigate in the workplace. So the first thing I would definitely say is that, play to your strengths. And there's quite a number of online assessments that help you identify what those strengths are. So you can do a free personality test, you can do a strength finder assessment, which you can easily find on Google. Or you can do something a bit more intricate and a bit more detailed, like the Enneagram assessment. But as far as I know, Enneagram does come at a cost. I'm not aware of ones that are free. And if they are free, I suspect that they might not be fully comprehensive. So using those type of psychometric assessment or personality tests just to gauge exactly what your interests are, what your strengths are, because that is definitely going to inform how you perform and how you grow within the workplace. Then the second part, which is related to the first part, is doing aptitude tests. So there are formal aptitude tests that are offered at specific universities, specifically under their career counseling practices. So a lot of universities do have some form of career counseling offering, and if you are leaving school and you want to investigate what career you should go to, do utilize those career services, especially if there are certain universities that you want to go to. So find out what their career counseling services are like, and make an appointment, and then you can speak to a career guidance counselor who can give you some form of insight in terms of what you can look at based on maybe your academic performance, based on your strengths, based on your interests, and also based on marketability post-graduation, because that's another thing that we need to consider. And then lastly, if it is within your affordability, career coaching. There are plenty of great career coaches out there. You can easily find them on Instagram. One that I love and I follow is Fiona Martin. She is on Instagram, she's on LinkedIn, she's got her own website with a bit more detail around career guidance, career development, and professional development as a whole. She's an experienced career coach, and people like that do really assist in making choices or even pivots in one's career. So there's a wealth of knowledge around there when it comes to career coaching, and I would suggest that you actually go to a professional as opposed to relying on like YouTube content, for example, or anything that you might find on the internet. If you are looking for coaching specifically, rather consult with a professional who will provide the relevant guidance, and it would be informed also by their discussions with you and them, getting to know your personality, your interests, your strengths, and potential marketability based on a combination of all of those. So yeah. Then the third question is, any advice on getting a mentor? So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because there is a whole dedicated episode that I did with Pearl Mgomezulu on mentorship, or the importance of getting a mentor and mentorship. So please do refer to that, because she does highlight a lot of important points around, why mentorship is essential and why you would need a mentorship, especially when it comes to career development. And she even highlights important themes around some of the things to look out for when you are looking for a mentor, and also how you should manage a relationship with the mentor when you do get one. So that is a very comprehensive episode that I would rather refer you to, as opposed to me trying to summarize it right now and giving you my insight or paraphrased version of that episode. So it was the first ever episode that we did on wellness in the workplace with a guest. So please do watch that or listen to it if you're listening via any major podcast streaming service. Cool. Then the next question says, where do you ultimately see yourself in your career? What is your most desired outcome? Okay, that's a very interesting question, because I'd like to think that I'm very organic in my career planning. I like things to unfold as they should, and I like things to be very organic in my process of growth and development. So I don't necessarily have a fixed plan in terms of what it is that I want to do, but I do know what I am interested in, and I am, dabbling in different areas of what I'm interested in to hopefully then culminate into this one role that I would want to occupy, or even a business that I might want to eventually have. But to add a bit more color to the question, I would say that what I am interested in is strategy. So anything that is strategy, formulation, development, value creation, I love that stuff. And especially within the context of digital business, digital transformation, that's where I get a lot of inspiration, and that's where that's where I would like to ultimately, be in and do some form of specializing in that area from a direct, career perspective in relation to where I am and what I'm currently doing in my 9-to-5. So anything in corporate strategy, strategy formulation, development, and value creation, definitely that. But on the other hand, wellness in the workplace has opened me up to so many opportunities, and it's opened up my mind to what is actually possible. And by that I mean that I got exposed into a world around career coaching, personal development, professional development in a way that I hadn't envisioned. I think when I initially started Wellness in the Workplace, beyond this being about content creation and sharing my insights and information, around very relevant and topical conversations, what I did want to do was ultimately go into some form of speaking, in relation to the content that is on the podcast. But another layer that has presented itself is opportunities then around, or possibilities rather, around coaching, career coaching, business coaching, executive coaching, potentially even, I remember when I had a discussion with a guest that was on the podcast on her platform, she mentioned something about seeing a book in the future for me. I don't know how that's going to materialize, but even something like that would be of interest. But to answer the question directly, ideally a role or a business that would merge my technical skills that I have acquired through my work experience and my interest in strategy formulation and development, and then the work that I do via Wellness in the Workplace. So any business or role that would allow for something like that, I think would be at this stage for me a desired outcome. That was a long-winded answer, but I needed to just set that context. This is not a question, but rather a comment, and This person said, not a question, but wanted to say thank you for taking the time to build out this important platform. Thank you so much for engaging, and thank you for this feedback. Then the next question is, how does one navigate workplace complacency? Okay, so I think workplace complacency is layered. And I don't know if it is coming from the perspective of you recognizing that you are complacent at work, or you recognizing someone else within your team that might be complacent. But either way, I think it's multi-layered. I think there are a lot of factors that contribute to being complacent at work. Recently, we have seen the term quiet quitting surface quite a bit on social media, more specifically on TikTok, and it's a term that refers to, people just doing the bare minimum at work because they've mentally checked out. And I think for that movement specifically, it's not by coincidence that it has happened right after the pandemic, because the pandemic was quite emotionally, mentally, and physically taxing on a lot of us. And, this was almost some form of resistance to the expectation to show up 100% and beyond, even after the mental, emotional, and physical toll that going through, COVID-19 has had on us. So I'm not surprised that, the movement around quiet quitting, even though some people have said that it's been there long before we've witnessed it recently, it is no surprise that it's really specifically happened right after, the pandemic, and that it is some form of labor revolution that is taking place. And in relation to the question around workplace complacency, I think it's two ways, right? It can happen that you are being complacent, or a person is complacent because of the environment that they're in. The work environment is not supportive. The work environment does not recognize them. The work environment does not provide development opportunities. And as a result, they decide to just do the very basic and very bare minimum just to get by. And I think, when we are talking about workplace complacency, we shouldn't just shift the focus to the employee. We should also talk to the employer to find out what they're doing to ensure that their employees are energized, are inspired, are motivated, have the right support that they need. They're addressing, or they're providing rather facilities that would address things around, for example, mental health or wellness, etc. And I think that is a responsibility for the employer to make. And over then, above that, if the employer is still providing that and the employee is still complacent, then it's worth then having, discussions around performance. It's worth then having discussions around what additional support the employee might need and what the factors are actually contributing to their workplace complacency. Because being complacent just doesn't happen out of nowhere. It does not, and it's important to then identify what an individual's drivers are, what their motivators are, and to tap into that in order to encourage some form of inspiration and some form of delivery on their performance. So I don't think it is a, single answer for every individual that might be complacent, and I don't think it's a single answer for every workplace environment, because you have to consider a number of factors, both from the employer's side as well as the employee, that could potentially then contribute to the workplace complacency. I hope that answers the question. So then the final question was a question that I had to do a bit of research on, because I was not aware of what this campaign was about. And this follower said, "What is your take on the Tear the Paper Ceiling campaign?" So before even sharing what my take would be on something like that, I think it would be useful to share the definition of what the paper ceiling is that they're referring to here. So it says here that the paper ceiling is the invisible barrier that comes at every turn for workers without a bachelor's degree. So what the Tear the Paper Ceiling campaign is saying is that we need to do away with using bachelor degrees as an entrance criteria for certain jobs. And I think it's a very interesting campaign because for the longest time we had the narrative that you need at a very minimum a bachelor's degree to even be considered for any role, just to have a foot in the door. And all of a sudden, because of the access to information, because of digitalization and people being able to access information at such rapid paces, it has then made sure that, other individuals can get upskilled very quickly and can use platforms such as Udemy, YouTube, Coursera, whatever the case is, to be able to upskill themselves in certain industries. I do want to say, though, that there are certain industries, there are certain roles or jobs that require a technical ability that I think should only be acquired via a higher education institution. And there are some industries that are so highly regulated that you cannot bypass the importance of getting accreditation and certification at a reputable institution. So if you're talking about law, if you're talking about financial services, some roles within financial services, those are industries where you cannot just rely on, the skills gained from online platforms that have tried to democratize learning to some extent. So I think if we are going to apply, or I guess remove a barrier to entry to certain industries, we do have to do that contextually, situationally, and consider the industry, the role, and the level of skill set that an individual needs to have. So that's one part. Then the second part is that if we are talking about individuals that are highly skilled, especially in the context of South Africa, we need to reflect on who are those individuals, because it's probably not individuals that look like me. It's individuals that have probably had access to the internet, that have had access to all of these online platforms, that are not on the disadvantaged end of the digital divide. So if we're saying that we are going to consider highly skilled individuals, the question then is, where are these individuals getting those skills, and are those skills accessible to all? Because if that is not the case, then we need to put in some form of barrier to entry that is going to create a degree of equity and allow for a fair chance for all to be considered. And obviously fair in this moment is being used very loosely, but I think having an entrance requirement such as a bachelor's degree creates some degree of, no pun intended, some degree of equity that allows a bit of a fair play for all, as opposed to then relying on people getting or being hired because of their skill sets, and skill sets that some have benefited from because of their privilege, and a privilege that is not accessible to all. I hope you are catching my drift. So that concludes the questions that I received. I think it was a very succinct and straightforward episode, but it's much needed because it is this time of the year. We are winding down and ready to close up the year 2022. I do want to say once again, thank you so much for tuning into Wellness in the Workplace, the podcast. We are available on every major podcast streaming service. If you do want to follow the podcast on Instagram, it's at Wellness in the Workplace _ on Instagram. Do follow, do like, do comment, do share, do keep talking about it. For now, that's all for season 1. My name is Mbali Mzinyane. I'll see you in the next season. Bye-bye.